caught it just in time. Okay, and when we factor by grouping, we take those 4 terms and we chop them down to 2 smaller terms. Well, 2 smaller groups. And we find the greatest common factor out of each group. So here we can factor 3x out of both of those. Okay, so we know 3x times x will give us our 3x squared. And we know 3x times 2 will give us our 6x. And if we distribute it, we'd end up right back where we started, so we know it's right. Now for these two, we can only factor out a 1. That's the only thing they would have in common. So 1 times x would give us our 1x. And 1 times 2 would give us our 2. And we know that would equal to 0. So now we have what we were looking for, our matching binomials, which we can go ahead and just factor those out. So we bring those out to the front. So we have x plus 2. And you can cross them out if you want to. And whatever's left goes into the other binomial. So you have 3x plus 1 equals 0. Okay. Which brings us right back to where we were, where all we have to do is set both, oh, not both terms, both factors to 0. So that means x plus 2 can equal 0. Bring that up a little bit, try to get the whole thing. Here we go. So x plus 2 can equal 0, or 3x plus 1 can equal 0. So if we subtract 2 from both sides here, you have x equals negative 2. We subtract 1 from both sides, then divide by 3, we have x equals negative 1/3. Okay. So either one of those would make this true. All right, so any questions on this one? All right. Oh, sure. Mm-hmm. Okay, anyone still writing on this one? All right. Okay, so let's say if we wanted to solve say 6x squared plus 24x equals 0. Okay, so you only have 2 terms, so the best you can do here is just remove the greatest common factor. So if you factor 6x squared plus 24x, you can just factor 6x out of both terms. Uh-oh, wrong one. I was about to do... Okay, so 6x times x gives us 6x squared, and 6x times 4 gives us 24x. So we just factor out our 6x. Okay, so that means that this would just become 6x times x plus 4 equals 0. Okay, so once you have it factored, again, you just set each to 0. Okay, so that means your 6x can equal 0, or x plus 4 can equal 0. So if we divide both sides by 6, x equals 0 over 6, or just x equals 0. And here, if we subtract 4 from both sides, you have x equals negative 4. So you don't have to go through all of the steps of factoring for each one. Sometimes you just get the greatest common factor, and it's pretty straightforward from there. Leave that up for a few more seconds. Yes.
Are you sure it's the test paper we did last time?
Oh, I still have to scan them. As soon as I scan them, I'm going to bring them back, which should be next class.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It looks like everyone's done writing. Okay, so what if we wanted to solve negative 8n to the third power plus 26n squared minus 6n equals 0? Okay. Now we could factor out an n from each term and put it in the right form. But then you have 8 times 6, and you have to find two numbers that multiply and then add. So we want to make these as small as we can. So we can actually factor out a negative 2n from each term. Now, it doesn't have to be negative 2, but I just try to make that first term positive. Okay, so if we factored out a negative 2n, negative 2n times 4n would give us negative 4n squared, sorry about that. Will give us negative 8n to the third. And negative 2n times negative 13n will give us positive 26n squared. And negative 2n times positive 3 would give us negative 6n equals 0. Okay. So even though we were able to make our coefficients smaller, we still have to use the A times C method. Okay, so we know here, but we just have to use it on that part. So we know our A is equal 4. our b is equal to negative 13, and our c is equal to 3. So our a times c is going to be 4 times 3, which is 12. Okay, so it means we have to find two numbers that multiply to equal our a times c. And those same two numbers add to equal your b. And let me clean that up a little. Okay. So we know 12 times 1 is 12, and 12 plus 1 is 13. But since you add them together and they're negative, we just make that negative 12 and negative 1. Because if you add them together, negative 12 plus negative 1 is negative 13. Okay, so we know for the a times c method, we're going to replace our b term with those two. So we're going to replace negative 13n. So that means this will become negative 2n. And remember, we just factored that part. So that becomes 4n squared minus 12n minus 1n. Plus 3 equals 0. Let's bring that up a little bit. And just like before, we take those four terms and get our two little subgroups. Okay, so we end up with negative 2n. Oh, actually, let me finish up that part first before I bring anything down. So this one, we can actually factor out a 4n. And that leaves us with 4n times n gives us 4n squared. And 4n times negative 3 gives us negative 12n. And for these two, we can factor out a negative 1. Okay, so we know negative 1 times n gives us our negative 1n. And negative 1 times negative 3 gives us our positive 3. Okay, so we know we have our common binomial, which is exactly what we were looking for. So that means we can factor that out. And you can cross a line through it if you want to. And whatever is left goes into the next binomial. So you have 4n minus 1. Okay, so not forgetting that negative 2n, we have negative 2n, and this is factored into n minus 3 times 4n minus 1 equals 0. Okay, so now that we have everything factored, we do just like we did before and set each of them to 0. Okay, so that means we can have negative 2n equal to 0. Or we could have n minus 3 equal to 0. Or we could have 4n minus 1 equals 0. Which means any one of those would make that true. So if we divide both sides by negative 2, you have n equals 0 over negative 2, which just becomes n equals 0. Oh, bring that up a little bit. If we add 3 to both sides here, we have n equals 3. And if we add 1 to both sides, then divide by 4, we have n equals 1/4. Okay, so any one of those answers would make our original problem true. Okay, any questions on this one? All right. Leave that up for a few more seconds. All right, looks like everyone's done writing. Oops. Uh-oh. Okay, so what if we wanted to solve 4x squared minus 28x equals negative 49? Okay, but remember, before you can solve it, it has to be in standard form. It must be in standard form in order to solve it. Okay, so that means if we add 49 to both sides, we have 4x squared minus 28x, plus 49 equals 0. Okay, so we have it in our standard form, which means we can do 4 times 49, get the answer to that, then find two numbers that multiply to equal that, and add together to equal negative 28 and go through all the trouble. Or we can remember our perfect square trinomials. Perfect square trinomials. Okay, remember that is if you have a squared plus 2ab plus b squared, that's equal to a plus b squared. Clean that up a little. And if you have a squared minus 2ab plus b squared, that's equal to a minus b squared. Okay, so remember, from perfect square trinomials, you look at the first and the last term. And those two are both perfect squares, because we know that 4x squared, we can just make that equal 2x squared. And 49, we can just make that equal to 7 squared. So if we rewrite this one, our 4x squared will end up with 2x squared minus, we're going to leave that blank for right now. And instead of 49, we'll make that plus 7 squared equals 0. Straighten this up a little bit. Now we have a minus sign here, so we're going to use this one. So that means if our a is equal to 2x and our b is equal to 7, this middle term has to equal 2 times a times b before we can just plug it in. So this has to be 2 times a times b, which means it has to be 2 times a, which is 2x, times b, which is 7. 2 times 2 is 4, so you have 4x times 7, so you have 28x, which matches what we have up here. Oh, clean that up a little. Okay, so since it matches what you have up here, we can just plug our a minus b squared right into there. Okay, so we know our a minus b squared is just 2x minus 7 squared. Okay, so to kind of summarize everything we just did, our 4x squared minus 28x plus 49 equals 0 becomes 2x minus 7 squared equals 0. Okay, so all we did was factor the left-hand side.
So wait,
Mhm.
so we figured it out,
Mhm.
and so it's okay, it's acceptable if we just end up with the a minus b squared, right?
Yep, but only if that middle term matches, because a lot of that middle term has to match. Because if you had, let's say, negative 32 in the middle of there, then it wouldn't have been a perfect square. Then you have to use the a times c method. Okay. So here, since we are now solving this, 2x minus 7 squared, we can just make that 2x minus 7. Well, we don't have to do it this way, but whenever it's squared, you're just going to get the same answer twice. But this is just kind of the step-by-step showing of it. Okay, so if you set both of these to 0, that just means 2x minus 7 equals 0, or 2x minus 7 equals 0, and you only have to solve it once, since it's the same thing. Okay, so if we add 7 to both sides, then divide by 2, we know x equals 7 over 2. All right, so any questions on that one? All right. Leave that up for a few more seconds. All right. So let's say if we wanted to solve say x times 3x minus 1 equals 14. Okay, and you always want to put it into standard form before you try to solve. Which is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. All right, and I give you a few minutes to start on this one. very first step, you should have distributed the x to get rid of the parentheses.